Please go ahead.
Thank you. Dear Madam Rector Magnificus, dear promoters, dear professors in the doctoral committee, my friends and family, thank you for being here today. This story is about Skopje. Skopje is the city of my adulthood life. I moved there when I was 16 years old, and it is through its public spaces that I learned to love my new home. Through the years, I have witnessed profound changes happening in the public spaces in Skopje. They were privatized, they were commercialized, they were reshaped and transformed, and I, as a citizen, had no intake in any discussion related to how public spaces should look in my neighborhoods. And then, 2009, a megalomaniac project titled Skopje 2014 took the stage. It instrumentalized public space to fight political wars and unfulfilled promises of the leading political elites. The ethnic history, culture, religion, and language of the dominant Macedonian ethnic group was visibly acknowledged in the public space, and other ethnic minorities, other ethnic groups in the country felt devalued of their contribution to the country. As a result, we ended in a symbolic war between these two dominant ethnic groups, Macedonians and Albanians, and colliding ethno-national narratives being acknowledged in public spaces in both ethnically mixed and ethnically more homogeneous neighborhoods. Why am I focused on public spaces? In a country as Macedonia, that is clearly divided, strongly even divided by ethnic lines, which has an education which is divided by the language of instruction, where cultural consumption is also framed within these ethnic borders, it seems that public spaces remain to be the only places left for ethnic groups to meet and cohabitate. So my research, in fact, is not about Skopje 2014, although this project truly exemplifies how one's cultural history could be acknowledged in the public space. Instead, I focused on how citizens perceived, and not political parties, not urban professionals, how citizens perceived the practices through which language, ethnicity, religion, and collective cultural symbols have been acknowledged in the public spaces of their neighborhoods. What was the political, social, and symbolic value of public spaces for them? So how did I do that? I selected 2 ethnic and 2 mixed neighborhoods in Skopje. I used mixed methods, gathered both quantitative and qualitative data. I used random sampling approach for the quantitative data and used the non-probability approach for in-depth interviews with residents living in these areas. Finally, I was able to reach 403 survey respondents and 30 in-depth interviews with residents. The quantitative data was analyzed using the SPSS program, while the qualitative data was analyzed using the structural and pattern coding methods. Going fast and forwards towards the conclusions, I can say that the political, social, and symbolic value of public spaces in Skopje could be termed as the diversity paradox. Why? Public spaces in Skopje are not natural and spontaneous sites of positive intercultural contact. Residents living in mixed neighborhoods, more often than those living in ethnic neighborhoods, opt for co-ethnic cultural events happening in co-ethnic public spaces where people from their ethnic group goes. And this self-segregation is not a prevalent behavior among a specific ethnic group. In fact, all ethnic groups, Macedonians, Albanians, and other smaller ethnic groups, they all opt for self-segregation while using public spaces. Civic exclusion dominates the participation discourse in Macedonia. Less than a quarter of the citizens have been engaged in any kind of debate or discussion related to the look, to the plan of the public spaces in their neighborhoods. They have neither discussed this with their co-fellows, neither have discussed this with their political representatives in the municipal council. More so, there is a prevalent feeling of powerlessness. So they feel powerlessness to influence any policy decision related to the plan and design of public spaces in their neighborhoods. So what is the good, appropriate citizen that is constructed through the symbols accommodated in the public space? Well, this appropriate citizen permeates the ethno-national rhetoric and the colliding ethno-national, and this needs to be aligned with the dominant ideology of the group which is occupying the space. Such ethno-national practices of accommodation of diversity within public spaces have pushed groups to self-segregate and to compartmentalize within their own ethnic belonging. Diversity is seen as a threat to national unity, and this is more so the perspective of the Macedonian ethnic group, which perceive that the pluralization of the political community endangers the idea of homogenized nation, of a common state, of a common language, of a common flag. And they're unwilling to redistribute the powers and resources to other ethnicities. The discourse on diversity is mainly dominated by the idea of ethnic belonging and ethnic identification. So issues of social inequality or issues of solidarity are neglected within this discourse. There is a lack of understanding of a potential conflation between ethnic belonging and social inequality. There are transformative experiences which exist in public spaces in Skopje. They're not totally useless, so to say, but these transformative experiences happens in places which are mainly multicultural education and environments and open public spaces used for leisure and for recreations. So one of my most compelling discoveries throughout this research is that in the case of Skopje and Macedonia, the planning of public spaces could be termed as staged multiculturalism. We're not talking about an experience, we're not talking about a lived multiculturalism in public spaces, but in fact we're talking about staged, where the public spaces is the stage, the platform where diversity is enacted. This leads me to think of how then to plan for diversity in public spaces, and arguing some of my principles on how to build a framework for supporting diversity within public spaces. I argue that any planning of public spaces which gives a recognition to difference should go through a process, political act of interpretation of needs and priorities of groups and use the mechanisms of deliberation. So instead on limiting civic participation within the policy discourse, we should focus on how to build mechanisms for greater citizens' participation. Public spaces should be a place for habitual engagement, so mundane multicultural engagement between the groups, where the achievements of the goals of the wider community could be achieved through interdependence of goals. So gathering groups together to work together towards achieving of certain groups. And finally, instead of focusing on this technocratic planning of the city, we should think of the social planning of public spaces, focus on the social dynamics that happens in the public space, and focus on the process of the city being made instead of the product, the city that has been made. So what are the benefits of my research? Firstly, it contributes to the understanding of the context where the intergroup contact happens. So according to the contact hypothesis, contact is the only way for the groups to surpass ethnic fragmentation and ethnic stereotypes. But it's not only important of how contact happens, but in fact of where the contact happens. And we need to think about this if we are to build public spaces that encourage and support intercultural communication. Secondly, we need this research contributes to the idea of how governance is supported within multicultural society and what are the failures of this elite process of accommodating diversity into multicultural societies that are fragmented along ethnic lines. It seems that in Macedonia, the facilitation of the elite accommodationist approach through the political parties had not produced the communication between the ethnic groups, but instead it had built them more and more, it had increased the bridge between them. And finally, it contributes to the idea of production of space as not a platform where citizens' experiences through this process are static and unimportant, but in fact, they are important contributors, active contributors to the process of planning of public spaces and using it as a participatory practice. My last and most compelling discovery is that while essentializing public spaces to only affiliate to the ethnic identification, public spaces in Macedonia lose the transformative power to instigate other forms of associations and belonging, which are very important to leap from this ethnicized multiculturalistic trap that we are faced with. To me, this research revealed a very important dimension of public spaces, of how important public spaces are for people's sense of belonging and self-understanding. And then planning the quality of public spaces, both the physical characteristics and the social dynamics of public spaces, remain to be very critical elements in supporting public spaces that do facilitate structural and fruitful intercultural contact. I'm still passionate about this research, even after 6 years reading and learning about this topic. I'm still eager to discuss this issue because I find it important not only for cities or countries that face strong ethnic fragmentation, such as the cities and the countries in the Western Balkans, but I find it appealing that it's also a learning experience for cities that consider themselves to be more homogeneous, but in fact do face challenges in addressing acknowledgement of differences, in particular after the explosive waves of migration that we have witnessed in the last few years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Candidate.